Hi and welcome to our webinar series on modern data stack. And I'm Matilda from Knowit, and today I have Paul from DBT Labs. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Matilda.
So let's talk about analytics engineering.
Sure.
Because finally we have something that I feel like is named for what I do. We have a role for what I've been done for years. But how would you describe analytics engineering?
So I would describe it as the vital bridge between the infrastructure engineer and the data analyst. So if we were to have a look back through the data stack over the last 10 years, we had very well-defined and traditional roles. We had the infrastructure engineer who 10 years ago would have been responsible for setting up the database, extracting the information, taking care of the transformation. And then we would have an analyst who would have been quite separated, quite disjointed from the process at the end. Now, obviously, we've seen a lot of change over the last 10 years. We have seen the rise of the cloud data warehouse, and we've seen so many new business intelligence tools and the rise of self-service. But even with those changes on both ends of the spectrum, the actual middle bit, where we would say analytics engineering needs to live, hasn't changed. How data is transformed hasn't changed. People are either using the tools they were using 20 years ago, or they're trying to build something themselves, and it's not really working for a lot of companies. So we see analytics engineer as being this vital bridge between the two halves, the role of someone who will take on some of the functionality that's currently sitting with the infrastructure engineers, such as working on optimization and ensuring that data is clean for analysts downstream. What we would say is right now in the marketplace is a lot of people who do not have analytics engineers would expect, if we were to take data quality along the stream, some people would say that's the job of the analysts to ensure that the data is clean by the time it arrives at their desk. They would say it 100% is not. And some people would say it was the job of the infrastructure engineers, and they would say, no, that's not my job. My job is to set something up. So we see the we see the analytics engineer as being someone who's absolutely responsible for the provision of clean data to end users.
I think that's a really good point, that actually this isn't something new. This was something that was in between these two roles, and you never knew who was responsible for it.
Absolutely.
So it's just like bringing that into one role and making it sure that this gets done properly. Exactly.
There has been, as I say, a very clear definition of what the infrastructure engineer does and a very clear definition of what the analyst does. But until now, we just haven't had somebody focus on what I like to call the plumbing, which isn't very sexy, but it is very necessary.
That's a good analogy, yeah. And so the role of the analytics engineer, it's growing, or?
Yes, so what we would see is this has become a very important and critical role for companies across the globe. That is, in essence, why DBT exists. So just to give you a bit of background, that's actually what we started doing, and we developed a small tool that would enable us to clean up the plumbing. We would go into companies in our previous iteration as a different company to help organizations get the results they wanted from their data. And then we realized we could take this tool and turn it into something else, which is what the modern DBT tool is. And once we started providing that to organizations across the globe, they were like, yes, this is the bit that we've been missing. They couldn't identify it until we helped them identify what the gap was. And now they're filling it with this new breed of analytics engineers.
Yeah, and I totally agree. This was something that we couldn't even point our fingers at, that we need something like this. But when I got to know DBT, I was like, this is exactly what we were missing, and why wasn't it here sooner?
It's the unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know, and that's what we're out there doing now. And every time we are successful, or the name and the idea of the analytics engineer grows, and it is just spreading throughout the entire data community, and people are now recognizing the vital need for them.
That's exactly true. So also DBT is growing, I think, potentially like really fast.
We're in our rocket phase at the moment. We have currently 12,000 companies using our product across the globe. Over 10,000 are using our open source product, and over 2,000 are using our paid cloud environment. to, completely take control of their data infrastructure and accelerate their success using data.
That's great to hear. And about the open source, how's your thinking about why open source? Why go open source?
Open source, and this is my first experience in working for an organization with open source, it's a fantastic accelerator because it gives users the chance to engage with the product in a way that makes sense for them. There's no tension or friction or barriers to entry. I know sometimes that when a vendor comes to an organization, they're slightly afraid. What is this person going to sell me? What are they going to try and get out of me? With an open source product, the customer can start their journey in a way that makes sense to them. Having worked in many other companies in the past, this is the first company where I've engaged in where customers come to us and they already know the product. They're not asking us what it is. It's like, we're doing this with DBT. We understand the importance of analytics engineering. Can you now help us go to the next stage? So overall, I would say open source is a fantastic way to open doors, and it's a way for companies to start something with minimal risk and with no overheads.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So DBT is a tool. So what would you say are the key features of the tool?
Sure.
Why it is so good?
The first thing that I would mention is it's one of our core principles that we have centered on SQL. And the reason why we've centered on SQL is it is the language that the databases use and the infrastructure engineers use. It's also the language of the analysts. So if we're going to have an analytics engineer, they need to speak the language on both sides of the fence. So that's our first thing. By focusing on SQL and then treating it like a code, what we can then do is we can give analytics engineers modularity. The ability to write a piece of SQL and then reuse that over and over. One thing I'd like to touch on as well is our community, and we can talk about that later as well. Because we're using SQL like code, we have community members that write code and put it into the community for people then to be able to take that and say, I have this problem, someone else has solved it, I can take that and slot that into my environment. So SQL is definitely one of our big features. Another feature that we think is really, really important is the idea of documentation and auto-updating documentation. So what we would see a lot of is when it comes to business logic, it's mostly contained in people's heads.
Yep.
And then if someone leaves or something happens, all of that vital context and information leaves with them. DBT will update and track the changes that people make. It will say who has made what change, and it will encourage them to enter in a standardized way the changes they've made, the context for it, the why for it. So that if someone leaves, the next person taking over will automatically see all of that and be able to work with it. So we're just trying to keep a seamless continuity across, for probably years for some of these organizations, their documentation and their logic.
Yeah.
Another great point on documentation as well is our DAGs, which are the flowcharts and the dependencies of data as they go through it.
I love them.
It's a very visual way to understand the dependencies from source to end. To see where there's a breakage, you can just click on a single line and it will follow it the whole way through. I have seen some incredible DAGs, where even on an 85-inch screen, it's impossible to completely bring it all in. And we know from feedback from the customers, even that alone has allowed them to transform how they view their business. There are other things, I mean, there's so much I could talk about. We could talk about how we go through and set up deployment tools for users so that when they're pushing something to production, they know that it's going to work, they can improve on it through CI/CD, they can get alerts, logging when changes are made. We tied in with GitHub for testing. But yeah, there's so much I could talk about in that regard. But if I could narrow it down, SQL and auto documentation and testing.
Yes, those are also my favorite features.
Good.
And also the version controlling with it, because that seems always to be missing. If it's not into process, then you won't come back to that and do it later. That's always missing. And then, for example, someone changes their role in the company or something like that, and you have nothing. Why is this so? Has this also always been like this and everything like that? So it's just crucial to have that version controlling, I think.
It's one of the most common answers. Why is this like this? Because it's always been like this.
Yeah, exactly. And has it? I don't know. as long as I've seen it. But also with the documentation, I love that the DAGs are created automatically, because that's something that I really need, but rarely gets done actually in the process if it's not automatic, because you don't have time to draw those, and they change so often that.
It is the reason why documentation often falls back, and it's the same for most jobs. Administration can be difficult. There's the day job, and then there's the administration around that. Yeah,
that's true. And what I like is also that it's actually also interactive. Like it's not just a picture, but it's actually something.
Yes, you can use. It's a tool. It's not just a fancy picture for you to show off.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love it.
Good.
What I also love is actually the community.
Yes.
And it's so great that there's like really like low-key stuff. I don't feel a pressure to be active, but if I want to be active, I have the place, and there's like so many people helping me if I have a problem, and so many different chats that I can follow, and maybe what other people are doing, and give some inspiration. And
I would say DBT views the community almost like a holy grail. Like, we're so privileged to have it. It's something that we never take for granted, and it's not something we ever want to abuse or monetize or go after in any way like that. I love seeing the interaction between different customers, between practitioners who use DBT daily, who will go into the Slack channel, who will answer each other's questions, who will then in turn come back and help us refine the product. So analytics engineering it's a fairly new concept, and we're not going to go out there and say with 100% certainty, this is it, this is what it is now and forever. This is something that we'll work with the community on, and their feedback will not only help us refine what the role is, but they are actively involved in helping us refine the product and make it better. It's a great resource for partners as well to go in, to be able to help people to, work on their brand. And I think overall, as I watch it grow, particularly in Europe, I think it's fascinating to see how all of the elements are coming together to just make the product better and to make the role of the analytics engineer better as well.
That's true. And I'm really eager to see what you have to offer. In October, you have your first summit.
So every year we do Coalesce. It is a massive celebration of DBT in the community, and we talk about the product. We're going to be running it this year from the 17th to the 21st. It will be a 5-day online event, and it's free to register and anybody can join it.
Yeah, I already did.
Great stuff. And we're going to have regional events as well in London, Sydney, and New Orleans. So I would say definitely check in on that. There's going to be a lot of news for the future of DBT, what our roadmap is going to be, where we're going to focus, and of course lots of community news as well.
That's great to hear. I'm really eagerly waiting for October, and also for what's coming there. So I'm really happy to see that there is this new tool that's helping me in my work, and that it's always like progressing and answering new questions as well.
There's so much good stuff coming. I can't talk about any of it. They'll shoot me, but I think you will absolutely get a great kick out of what we're going to announce over those 5 days.
Great. Thank you for...
No worries. No, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Perfect.